Welcome to this episode of Security Market Watch. I'm your host, Josh Bruning, and I'm here today with Maggie Dillon and our guest, Ethan Altmann. Ethan is the compliance product owner over at Anecdotes. Ethan, welcome to the show. Can you give us a little bit of background and tell us a little bit about Anecdotes?
Sure, absolutely. So Anecdotes was founded a little bit over 3 years ago. We're based out of Tel Aviv in Israel, also with offices over here in the States where I am right now. And really, we aim to help organizations automate their entire kind of all of their GRC processes, be that passing audits, be that really moving into the realm of data-powered risk management. Recently, we've really pushed into that direction. And really, our aim is to remain at the cutting edge of tech and data-powered GRC, being that, in my opinion, it's probably kind of the straggler in the cybersecurity world when it comes to staying at the forefront of tech. So that's really where we operate.
Maggie, what's new in your world? Do you have anything to say?
That is an open-ended question, my friend. I have a lot of questions already out the gate, but I guess the first one that I wanted to ask you about, we're seeing a lot of fiscal year end coming through with companies. I'm already getting asked kind of what I'm seeing in the market. So I'm going to turn that question on you, Ethan, with maybe current customers that you're seeing. You're doing a lot of these audits. What are some of the biggest challenges for your current clients? And could you just maybe even give us a case study or something to that magnitude?
That's an interesting question. I think more and more, this isn't so much this year. Here's a kind of, more over the past few years with some of our larger clients is naturally, in a globalized world, you want to work with more and more customers and gain more and more customers across the world. And naturally that exposes you to broader regulations, compliance obligations, and things like that. And therefore, organizations that previously would have been perfectly happy with just having ISO 27001 certification or a SOC 2 Type 2 report now find themselves thinking, I need 10 different things. If I want to be able to service all these markets, I need 10 different things. And more organizations seem to be, realizing that their GRC program is going to need to expand significantly. So that's really what I'm seeing.
And as far as the hiring needs for maybe like a chief compliance officer or CISOs of that magnitude, are you seeing customers wanting to bring maybe just a little bit more subject matter experts to the table as you're performing some of these projects?
Absolutely. I mean, before I was at Anecdotes, I was a GRC consultant, and the number of CISOs as a service, whatever you want to call it, the number of those kinds of customers that we were starting to see was really rapidly growing, and I have no doubt that's continued. And undoubtedly, for the larger organizations, that won't be consultancy based. That will be they're looking for in-house CISO and growing. We're seeing more and more titles coming in. Obviously, compliance managers have been around a long time, but security compliance engineers, more and more technical people moving into the GRC realm as well.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing customers spending more money on compliance, or is the trend to cut as much as possible over time?
I would definitely say spend more money. I don't think there's any question there. And ultimately, it's an interesting question because on the one hand, you look at the market we're in right now and everyone's looking to cut costs. But on the other hand, compliance done effectively is supposed to be a business enabler. So where it's a business enabler, it's you're going to need to spend money in order to enable that business. So I suppose it's kind of what comes first, the chicken or the egg thing with cutting costs versus you don't want to cut costs from compliance if it comes at the expense of enabling further business. And That's why I don't sit on any boards and make those decisions.
Yeah,
because they seem like very hard decisions to make.
It is very hard, especially if you're a vendor and you're looking to add value to your product and add value to the market through innovation. Yes, you want to sell more software, but the value proposition is you don't want to have a million pieces of software doing a million things. You want one piece of software that's going to do as much as it possibly can. We see a rise in integrations. Everything has to be pretty much integrated, which is aimed at cutting costs, really, right? So you would think over time, as innovation grows and as these companies tailor their offerings to their market, you would think that the aim would be for customers to cut costs and to become more efficient and to spend less. But do you attribute that rise year over year in cost to just the threats that are out there? Or is it due to complexity? Why do you think that over time companies are spending more on compliance rather than, why is the spending outstripping the efficiency?
So, well, I think saying that the spending outstrips the efficiency might be the case in an inefficient compliance program. The hope is, and here I'll plug Anecdotes for the first time, that if you have a tool like Anecdotes, then you turn that on its head. The logic being, like you said, you find yourself spending more and more money because there are more threats out there. Your compliance obligations are more complex. Your tech stack is more complex. And therefore, as a combination of all of those things, your ability to monitor your current, compliance posture becomes increasingly challenging, borderline impossible. So, if I think of the most simple ROI, calculation I could do, I could say, okay, Anecdotes costs you X. And then if I say to you, if I take the most basic, core functionality of Anecdotes, we integrate with your entire tech stack and we consistently collect evidence and analyze it, for all of your different compliance frameworks. If I say to you that twice a year to 4 times a year, some organizations do it more frequently, you have to reach out to all the stakeholders in your organization who own the various products within your tech stack and ask them for evidence and have them send over configurations and screenshots of configurations and things like that to you. The amount of time that takes and the amount of friction that causes within your organization, you could quantify quite easily. How much do you pay these people per hour? How many hours are spent on doing this? And once you get that number, you compare that to the X you spend on Anecdotes. And my guess, it's going to be X times 3, 4, 5, whatever it may be. That's the simple ROI calculation that you could do.
So if I were to recap and summarize what you're saying, it seems like companies are becoming more dense as innovation increases. So the value becomes more concentrated. So you have the ability to, the idea is if security is going well, the company's more profitable, they can spend, their tech stack becomes more complex, their business needs become more complex. Therefore, innovations like innovative technologies like Anecdotes, you are stripping, pardon the expression, but stripping the fat and really getting down to what's important. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. But it's more than stripping the fat, because stripping the fat implies you had access to the full body in the first place. But the first problem is you can't even access the full body in the first place. The ability to reach those stakeholders, that's the first problem you're going to encounter. How do I, as a CISO, GRC manager, compliance manager, whoever I am, how am I getting, the configurations from AWS for my production environment? Now, that's something that I'm almost certainly, or not almost certainly, but in a lot of organizations, I'm not going to have access to that. But I need to not be able to make changes there, but I do need to be able to monitor it to know that I am continuously in compliance with all of my various obligations. Mm-hmm. And in most organizations today, I can't do that. Yeah. But if I have a certain tool in place that enables me to do that, then not only am I going to have a much easier time come audit time because I'm going to have everything ready, I'm also not going to be sitting there nervous thinking, are the screenshots that I'm about to receive going to damn me in front of the auditor? Are they actually going to be what I'm expecting to see? Are they going to be good? I already know in advance exactly what's going on, and I'm continuously monitoring it through the year. So I suppose what I'm saying here is, the programs are becoming much more dense, and therefore having the ability to unpack them and analyze them continuously is that much more important Because if you try and unpack them once a year, come audit season or twice a year, whatever it may be, you're gonna struggle.
With great visibility comes great responsibility. That's
it.
terrible. Oh,
No,
gross.
I like
That
it.
was all right.
I have a question. I'm going to go back to something you just said there. How could companies do a better job of giving you that information so you're not spinning your wheels waiting to get access to the full body, so to speak? Some companies can only afford to hire a fractional CCO. Not everyone has access to exactly what you're talking about. And there is so much time that's wasted trying to gather data to really trim fat, everything that we're talking about here. How could companies do a better job for someone like you to come in and streamline this process for audits and whatnot?
Sorry to say it, you cut the human element. You create a integration between two products, one product that the compliance team uses, and the other products, which is the entire organization's tech stack. And by doing that, you have a one-time friction. And I put friction there in inverted commas because some organizations it will be, in order to set that up in the first place, in order to perform some kind of technical integration. But once you've done that, you're done. Then you have the data that you need on demand, and you no longer have to go, chasing up stakeholders that that you're a pain in the hoo-ha for them.
Definitely. Well, and I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. You've got such a lovely accent, and I know you have a lot of international experience. We're dealing with a lot of people here in the United States that are wanting to expand internationally, and there's a lot of compliance regulations that can be very intimidating when they're wanting to expand, all over the world. What advice would you give? Obviously, that was a great response, and I appreciate that. That was a very direct response, saying the human element, and that's not going to be everyone's favorite thing to hear, quite honestly. Yeah. But understanding that, how do we take, if we're going to eliminate a human element there, how can we then bring other people on board to expand internationally? Because there are some things you will need humans for.
Oh no, absolutely. If we stick really within my remit, which is security, compliance, and even some elements of privacy, if we begin to compare CCPA or CPRA to GDPR, for example, and you're going to need specialists involved. But at the end of the day, and this is really something that I spend a lot of time doing in my day-to-day, you take all of these different regulations, all of these different frameworks, there definitely regulations, that could be standards, whatever they are, and the delta between them is not that significant most of the time. So what you really need to be able to understand is, just take a basic example. If right now I undergo some kind of ISO 27001 certification every year, and next year I want to do a SOC 2 Type 2 report, what's the delta? What am I missing? What's the gap I need in order to get there? That would be an example of what you just said, where, okay, I'm used to working predominantly in Europe, but I really want to begin, serving customers in the US. Well, I'm going to, if I'm, let's say I'm a SaaS product, I'm going to need that SOC 2 Type 2 report. Bridging that gap and discovering where the delta is, I hate to say it, there are products out there like ours, but that's exactly what we specialize in. Showing you, at the end of the day, in order to satisfy, these controls and those controls in an audit, you are actually providing, let's say, 100 different evidence artifacts. Well, actually, the 100 you used here, 95 of them you can use here, and there are only 15 more that you're going to need in order to complete the pie over here in your SOC 2. And the knowledge that's needed to do that is something that, again, lives within these products and also lives within, in lots of consultants. If we bring back the human element, lots of consultants are now to do that as well.
Where do you guys stand in the development life cycle of after a compliance? Do you, or I should say the development life cycle? Let me rephrase that question. Where do you stand after a compliance? So the customer you're in the tech stack, you understand, and the customer understands where they need to be compliant. You have full visibility. You've got all the evidence for the auditor. There are some things that you need to do. and some controls that you need to remediate. Does Anecdotes do any of the remediation, or are you just providing visibility and sticking to the G, the R, and the C?
It's a great question, and we take a very specific approach towards that. And I think there's a broader question here, which is what's the relationship between security and compliance teams?
Right, exactly.
Because ultimately, if I'm a compliance professional looking to gather evidence, artifacts towards an audit and to continuously monitor my compliance, I need to have that visibility. Is my security team going to want to give me access, right access, as in WRITE, access in all of these production environments? The answer in most organizations is going to be no, unfortunately. And therefore, we take the path of, when we develop integrations, we're asking for read-only access. We're very, very professional in terms of principle of least privilege, and only asking for the things that we need in order to gather the data, so that security teams stay happy and they're not, they don't see the compliance team as a burden or even worse than that, a risk. So we really stay there, and we're collecting the data and analyzing the data, so we're able to serve up on a plate to the compliance team, this is what needs to be remediated, but then we'll give you the tools to go and use your existing workflows to initiate that remediation process. That might be, opening tickets on, Jira tickets, or, all kinds of ticketing systems for security and IT teams. That might even be initiating an automated workflow if you use, automation tools like, I don't know if you know, Talk and Times and those kind of tools. But again, from within Anecdotes, we're not going to perform that remediation for the exact divide I just spoke about in terms of compliance versus security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I apologize ahead of time. I keep having to put you on mute because I have a dog whining in the background, and this is live podcasting.
Wait, can we see him?
And he'll go, come here. Let's see. He's probably going to be selfish and stay off camera, so I apologize. But if he comes
he's camera shy.
His name is Achilles Tiberius Maximus. He gets a huge name. He's a little dog. I ask this in a lot of our podcasts, but I want to keep getting more and more opinions on it because everyone has different experiences, different types of clients and territories and whatnot. Security sees compliance as a risk. Compliance sees security as a risk. How do we make them friends and bridge that gap, in your opinion?
Cage fight in Vegas. We talked about this.
Oh, Ethan's already on the VIP list. We're going to add you. We'll tell you about it later. It'll be great.
Why in Vegas, in Rome? That's the new thing.
There you go.
Set it up. We'll be there. I've got money. I'm placing bets.
So I got lost. So yeah, the question is, okay, how do we really build that trust? And I think this is maybe where you start to talk about the future of what our industry looks like in terms of, I'll say the magic word, AI, as in maybe, and here's a trend that I'm seeing, and I might be wrong about this. I usually am wrong. If we think about traditional GRC, where a lot of the practitioners are very focused on, writing effective policies, policy is the main word here, governance, more the G than the R and C. And in comes generative AI, and kind of, to some extent, is capable of doing a lot of that. Then I think, and I already see this, there's going to be an increasing trend in very technical people entering the GRC space. I said before, security and compliance engineers. And I think when security and compliance professionals begin to speak much the same language, because compliance professionals are becoming increasingly more technical, then as the language begins to be the same, then I think the trust will come together with that. So I think part of the division until now has been the GRC professionals are more traditional and people who are better with words, whereas the security teams have been to some extent you can call them computer scientists, and all of a sudden now that gap is starting to look less large. They're starting to become more similar personas, and I do think that will help bridge that gap quite significantly.
I agree.
Are you guys doing anything for the upcoming NIST CSF framework? And do you have any information that I don't have? I've been trying to figure out exactly when they're coming out with this
2.0.
thing. Yeah.
So I've already received so many customer requests. I can't even, I was saying to you this week that I'm really bogged down. It's because of the combination of NIST 2.0 and FedRAMP shifting to Rev 5 of NIST 853, and all these things that just mean we have so many frameworks to be pumping out anecdotes into the product. And we guarantee a very quick turnaround time on these things. So it's very important to me that we deliver on that. One thing I will say about NIST CSF is I was really interested to see about 6 months ago, and I really didn't expect this, that it's our third most adopted framework amongst all of our customers.
What's your first? What's like number one and number two?
SOC 2 Type 2, and then ISO 27001, and then NIST CSF. The reason, obviously, that's really surprised me is because it's not an audited framework. Our customers are using that for the purpose of continuously monitoring their controls. They have Anecdotes is built on a cross-mapping architecture, and they know that if they stick with NIST CSF and they focus on that framework, and that will be the best way to focus on one framework and automatically ensure that they're also meeting their requirements in their other frameworks. And I think NIST CSF has received such popularity because it's so good at establishing that really good baseline. It's equally prescriptive and unprescriptive or non-prescriptive. And I, like I said, I was really surprised to see quite how popular it is. I'm a big fan personally.
NIST CSF, I would say for us on the trust map side, we're more of a maturity shop, more than GRC. We're not a GRC tool, and we're very upfront with our customers that we're not a GRC tool. We're a maturity, governance, business, cybersecurity business tool, and so you can't really when you want to break things down into sort of business speak, maturity works really well. And we've seen NIST CSF, the adoption of NIST CSF has been number one for us. And I would say probably followed by ISO 27001 and SOC 2. We've also seen quite a few CIS assessments. But maybe it's because it speaks more to security and it establishes that baseline, and maybe CISOs and security leaders are turning to something like NIST CSF because you can really break that maturity model into the subgroups, and you can tie costs and investments into that. And it's very simple to digest by the business from a security perspective. But that makes sense that from the compliance side, if you're being audited, you want to have that SOC 2. So I'm not surprised that NIST CSF is like your number 3. For us, it's our number 1. And so that all sort of tracks.
Yeah, what's interesting is you mentioned the idea of being able to tie, hard numbers to NIST CSF controls. I hadn't really given that much thought because the other really big trend that I'm seeing amongst our customers is increasing requests for support for risk quantification. Now, this has been a hot topic for a long time, but I think now people have more and more organizations are starting to feel unsatisfied with, I'm going to calculate risk on a 5x5 impact by likelihood matrix, which is kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard in some cases. And the idea of starting to trickle in quantitative elements is something that really is, we hear it all the time. We're also, we've been working very hard to push those elements into our product. And it's interesting, I haven't really explored the NIST CSF ties to that, so I'm going to have to go and explore that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I'm happy to always talk about it. And do you guys include as a part of your offerings, do you create a risk register for your customers? Is that built into Anecdotes?
So, let me do a really quick overview of how our product is built. It's data collection. It begins at data collection, which is really what I said before, integrating with the tech stack, collecting all the relevant data to security and compliance frameworks from the entire tech stack. That's the data collection layer. Then it's the data analysis layer. Okay, we're not just collecting the data, we're also analyzing it. The simple thing would be we're collecting all of your password policy configurations, and then we're analyzing them and saying, are they secure enough? Do they require a minimum of 8 characters, upper lowercase characters, and so on and so forth? So that's the analysis layer. And then kind of the top layer is applying that to a specific context. So the context is our application layer. It might be frameworks, it might be all the frameworks we've discussed, but our kind of other key applications are risk manager and user access reviews. So our risk manager application is an application that really has progressed significantly this year. We put a lot of resources and time into developing it. And these days it's a product in and of itself. And I've been fortunate enough to work kind of side by side with the product manager and the product team that lead the risk manager application. And it's been so interesting to see how organizations of all shapes and sizes at completely varying levels of maturity when we think about the frameworks that they do and the customers that they serve. There's absolutely no correlation between everything I just said and where they stand in terms of risk management. You can have these massive enterprise organizations with quite scary risk management processes, and then you can have these small startups who have efficiently and properly implemented the FAIR methodology. So it's been a really interesting experience when it comes to risk management.
Well, the risk quantification piece is sort of what we do best. You guys have the risk register. We've got the risk quantification and the investment, estimates according to NIST CSF or SOC 2 or whatever.
We should definitely further discuss this.
Yeah, it sounds like a match made in heaven. Oh my gosh, who is that guy?
This is Achilles. Sorry, I had to hold him. He is just whining. He's wanting to say hello. He's so interested in this conversation, by the way.
I love him. He is so cute. He's a Chihuahua, correct?
He is a Chihuahua, but he is nothing like the breed, and he's really friendly and sweet, and he just had his 14th birthday, so he probably can't even hear half of what we're saying, but it's all right.
Oh my gosh.
He looks like a young man.
He looks like a what?
He looks like a young man. Admittedly, he's quite blurry,
yeah,
but
he has a lot of energy. He really does. But I have one last question for you, Ethan. I know you have a lot of different types of clients and customers. One of the biggest things that I've been seeing a lot is with governmental entities and their frameworks or lack thereof, or just really having to mitigate quite a bit of risk as they're getting, things coming down from the hill. What challenges are you seeing with any of those types of clients, or is there anything you could speak to with that regard?
It's an interesting one. Admittedly, if we're talking about government clients, we don't service, many, if any, at all. But like I said, the biggest challenge that I see is not so much in the realm of frameworks and things like that. The biggest challenge I see is effective risk management. Time and time again, the most common thing that I hear people saying is we're just in the process of redoing our risk management program. We're just in the process of setting it up from scratch because we weren't happy with the previous iteration. Time and time again, I hear that excuse of we're not effectively managing risk at the minute. So that I really think is the biggest. Sorry for the background noise there. That I think is the biggest challenge facing large organizations and small organizations alike.
How do companies define risk management? So if you're saying trying to get our arms around risk management, how do you know when you're successful?
Well, that's a great question.
Philosophical, kind of.
Yeah, it's definitely a philosophical one, and it's sad to say, but you never really know until it's tested, right? But the first thing is everyone has a slightly different idea of what risk is. So, are we talking about purely cybersecurity related risk? Are we going into the realm of enterprise, broad risk management, business risk, corporate risk? And practitioners in each of those realms will tell you something completely different. Even within the cybersecurity realm, one person might call what I would call a vulnerability, something that appears from a tenable scan. They might call that a risk, and I always say, well, I don't really see that as a risk. if that occurs,
Right.
what's going to happen? And so the first thing is one of the biggest challenges I see is how do we define what is a risk?
Yes.
And the approach that
What
we've
would
taken.
you say a risk is? And I've got my philosophy, and I've seen what customers come up with, but I'm really curious. How would you define a risk?
So I probably, with my definition, I probably wouldn't pass a CISSP exam. But one thing that I really think is significant, in a risk. Okay, a risk might be, a data breach, let's say. But I always think it's completely irrelevant if you don't go one level deeper and apply it to something specific within the context of your organization. Okay, a data breach arising from, database X containing PII, for example. I like to go that one level deeper because I think only then do you have something that's a little bit less general and a little bit more applied to your organization. And our approach has been to simply take open source, reputable risk registers and implement them within our product. So SCF, the Secure Controls Framework, published a risk register called the SPRMM. So we draw a lot of risk from there. We also draw things from, in the realm of CI/CD, we, OWASP top 10s. There's now OWASP top 10s for privacy. The CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, also publish a top 10 list every year. I think they actually explicitly call them threats, which is interesting. Top 10 threats to cloud computing. But, if you can take them as risks, I think, and a lot of our customers choose to take those as risks as well. So it's a slightly roundabout answer there.
Yeah, you want to think, and I just had to switch cameras because one of them died. When you think of risk, sort of, and I can see the confusion between risk and vulnerabilities, because if somebody is equating a vulnerability to a risk, here's what I think they're really doing. They're going, okay, a vulnerability is something that has a likelihood and an impact, right? And they're going back to your fair, heat map sort of matrix. And so in their minds, well, what is the likelihood of a risk happening? So if you're thinking about insurance, if you're getting into a car accident, what is the impact and likelihood of crashing? How much is that going to cost, and how likely is it? So they would say, well, that's a risk, right? So I think people, when they're starting to think of likelihood and impact, they're thinking that a risk is anything that you can quantify by likelihood and impact, which coincidentally is the way that you quantify a vulnerability, right? That's how you can tell what vulnerabilities you have. So the way that we've sort of thought about risk is to sort of wrap it all into one package. And so we're looking at, let's say, instead of looking at getting hacked or ransomware as being a risk, we look at that as a vulnerability. And then, when I say we, I mean like kind of our philosophy at TrustMap. But we kind of packaged that vulnerability into a larger risk. And that risk may have a lot of vulnerabilities, but let's say outsourcing our SOC to India, right? Or outsourcing it to anywhere outside of the United States. So that could be the risk. And within that risk, you might have, let's say, tie that to, because we're outsourcing, we might have to adhere to certain data regulations or data controls or security and awareness training. It opens us up to a whole bunch of just outsourcing, or opens us up to a bunch of risks, right? There are all these little risks that it can sort of, this giant risk opens us up to. And so you can say, well, here are all these things that, like security and awareness training, that has a set of controls. What is the impact and likelihood of getting a ransomware attack because we didn't train these new SOC people overseas on our internal processes, and they don't adhere to our company's security? So you're basically taking a vulnerability and you're taking a larger item, some business decision, and this is kind of what ties it all back into the business. You're taking some business decision and you're saying, what are the vulnerabilities that are inherent to making that decision? So that overall business decision is a risk. Anytime I step outside of my house, that's a risk. But, getting into my car and driving on the freeway at 90 miles an hour, that's a vulnerability. And so there are things that I can do to control or mitigate the impact of getting into an accident when I'm in my car at 90 miles an hour, according to that, risk of leaving my house. Does that is that convoluted enough for you?
It's a different approach to what I think of, and that's exactly it. It kind of strengthens the idea that we all have a different perception of how we view risk.
Exactly.
So in your example, I would say the risk is getting hit by a bus. The risk, the vulnerability is leaving the house in the first place, and the mitigating control I should have put in place is just not leaving the house or reducing the amount that I leave the house in the first place, or maybe that's wrong, but
that's a really good. So that's flipped, right? But if you say the vulnerability is leaving the house, well, you can't apply.
The vulnerability would be that the traffic lights don't work, or something like that, in my opinion.
Yeah. What is the likelihood and the impact of the traffic lights not working?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Right.
But
yeah.
I don't know. It's hard for me to think of these more abstract examples, or maybe it's the opposite. They're not abstract because they actually make sense.
Yeah. But the point is,
yeah, go ahead.
The point is, and the reason I made it so convoluted is to illustrate your exact idea that it's a philosophical idea and it varies from person to person. So I think at the end of the day, what you have to do is talk to the business and say, what are your risks? What are risks to you? What do you think of as a risk, and how do we mitigate those risks? How do we reduce the impact and the likelihood of those risks, however we define it? But it has to start with the business.
Absolutely. And I think kind of the main thing I took from your example, which I absolutely agree with, is ultimately, in my opinion, a risk register needs to include a direct reference to those unique business decisions. So for me, a risk in the example you gave would be, okay, I need to evaluate, perform analysis of the risk of a data breach due to outsourcing my SOC to India. And the mitigating controls I'd expect to put in place would be, like you said, awareness training, signing all the employees on NDAs, whatever it might be. Encryption, so on and so forth. That would be my approach. It would be, okay, I take these classic risks, non-compliance, data breach, whatever it may be, and then I attach to it some kind of business-specific decision, which is the reason I want to analyze the risk. It's the context in which I want to analyze the risk. That's what makes this risk interesting.
Right.
That's my approach. And like you said, it's a philosophical thing. Everyone seems to have their own approach now.
Well, this is a good place to discuss it. This is a really good conversation because we always feel like we need to get it right. We need to have the correct answer. But I think in having these conversations, we sort of tease out the different perspectives, and then we sort of condense what is important, which I think we could both agree is the business.
Absolutely. And to come full circle here, it's another security versus compliance discussion. The security team are going to deem something different to be a risk to what the compliance team is going to deem to be a risk. The finance department has a whole different set of risks that they're interested in, and ultimately you're all aiming to deliver some kind of globalized risk report to senior management so they have a good understanding of the organization's risk profile. And so long as all the departments are speaking the same risk language and reporting in the same way, what you call a risk at a micro level probably doesn't really matter, as long as at the macro level everyone speaks the same language.
Exactly. Yeah. Brilliant. I think I think we figured it out, Ethan.
No. I have a curveball. So hold on. I have a curveball.
Man.
No, I'm sorry. I gotta interject here on behalf of team women and moms everywhere, because I'm hearing a lot of logistics and logical thinking here. And what I'm thinking from my HR heart is saying it starts with the training. And the biggest risk is humans. And if you're going to go philosophical, we got to talk about, it's the same premise. I got my fur kid here whining the whole time we're talking about this. So this is kind of where this is coming from. But if we are not raising a child properly, they're going to become a huge risk factor as an adult in many areas of their life, right? Same thing with this. If you're going to implement a brand new framework, anything to this magnitude, let alone you start a company and you say, I want to become the next Steve Jobs, and you're going to go international, right? If you are not starting with risk training, human risk training out the gate properly, all of this could be for nothing with one push of a button. And this is the biggest thing that I'm seeing with so many conversations, because we are having board of directors, CEOs, top C-suite executives opening phishing emails and getting hacked because they didn't pay attention during compliance training or any of the security training. And so I love everything that you've said, because I don't think like y'all, but maybe now I provide a perspective too, because especially as someone who's worked in HR before, we're not sitting here saying, I want to go out and train everyone today, but also how do we make it fun? How do we make it interesting? And more importantly, how do we make it compliant so that both of you aren't wasting your time, whether it's in sales or GRC? So there's my 2 cents, and I'll step off the podium. Thank you.
Well, I love it, because you're right. The biggest risk, and that's something that is intuitive, right? The beauty of what you're saying is that if you walk up to somebody and say, well, leaving your house is a risk, or, driving on the highway is a risk, there's a million things that you can come up with that are risks, right? And you're not going to be able to quantify it all. But what you're talking about is a single point of failure. Like, that's the biggest, the human is the biggest.
Human element, as I said. Yeah. Exactly. It's always the human element.
Yeah. Yep. Hats off to you, Maggie. Well done. Well played.
Well played. Bubble wrap the rest of our careers, and then we'll be okay. It'll work out.
That's the ultimate risk mitigation right there. Nobody
risk avoidance. Anything. It's not mitigation. It's risk avoidance.
There you go.
The bubble wrap. So the bubble wrap would be avoidance, not mitigation.
Exactly, because it's you just delete the risk. It doesn't exist anymore. Nothing can happen. I'm in bubble wrap. I'm just having this conversation.
We just came up with a name for your next product. Okay, Ethan? Bubble something.
Bubble wrap.
Bubble wrap.
Yeah.
Bubble dotes.
Bubble dotes.
Love it. All right. Well, this has been a really good conversation, and I want to keep it going. I love the conversations around risk, and I love the conversations that we get to have in security where we don't have to get it right. I'm not an expert. I don't call myself an expert. And I don't even play one on TV, even though right now technically sort of I'm on TV. But I'm not an expert, and we're just sitting here trying to figure it out. And this is how I think you help control for the human element. We transfer knowledge, we tease things out, and technology is you can have technological controls, but I'm always in favor of human controls. And I'm hoping that these conversations, for those who are watching or those who are listening, that these kinds of conversations help contribute to making our world a little bit safer and reducing risk just through information sharing. And that's what we're trying to do here. So Ethan, Maggie, y'all are great. Ethan, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. I know, like you said, you guys have been just really busy over at Anecdotes with the upcoming frameworks. Oh, by the way, did you say when CSF is coming out 2.0?
I didn't. I'm not really on top of it. I ought to be.
Nobody is. This is the thing. Nobody knows.
It was published. I just need to double check if it's the absolute finalized version. But yeah, it's been published. Okay.
Well, I'm not gonna say that it's final until it's final, because we saw what happened with the SEC rule.
Exactly.
Right. They were like, yeah, everybody prepare for this. And everybody was just throwing everything, the kitchen sink, the baby, the bathwater, everybody's throwing everything at the SEC rule. And then last minute, 3 out of 5, they said, you know what? The certifications, you don't need it. The expert on the board, oh, you don't need it. But what you do need is 4 days to report incidents when they happen. Crazy.
There was a really in the document about the with all of the comments. They responded to all the comments in, I can't remember what the document was. One of the really interesting things there was about risk quantification. People had commented that these kind of organizations ought to be practicing risk quantification, and of course that didn't gain traction for obvious reasons. Organizations are just not there yet. But yeah, there's a lot to say about that as well.
Great. Well, again, Ethan, thank you so much. And where can people find you online if they're looking for you, if you want to be found?
No, you're more than welcome to add me on LinkedIn, Ethan Alt, without the MANN at the end. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Maggie, where can people find you?
LinkedIn as well. Also on Instagram under Security Market Watch. We are on there. We would love your subscriptions. And our YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube.
Yes, please. And I'm Josh Bruning. Again, thank you for watching this episode or listening to this episode of Security Market Watch. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Josh Bruning. Thanks again, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, that was more than a half hour.
Cameras cutting out. I had a thunderstorm going on, trains going by, a dog whining. I think we did pretty good.
Yeah. We nailed it.
Yeah.
That was fun.